Hello and welcome to Revision Tips for SIPS Level 5, Advanced Diploma in Procurement and Supply. This is Module 7, Achieving Competitive Advantage Through the Supply Chain, and Learning Outcome 3, which is to understand the measure required to achieve competitive advantage. So we are going to look at the sources of competitive advantage, pricing arrangements, cost reduction activities, and the methods to promote greater collaboration. So a competitive advantage is a benefit that an organisation offers customers in order to outperform its competitors in the marketplace. So in a perfectly competitive market, consumers will typically choose the product that is priced at the lowest, as the entire substitute pool appears to produce identical value. There is a positive correlation between value to customers and competitive advantage. This enhances organisational performance. So when an organisation creates more value for its customers, its competitive advantage increases, thereby enabling it to generate high profits. Competitive advantage can be achieved through cost advantage and differential advantage. So cost advantage, a company pursues cost leadership as a source of competitive advantage, and it will look for suppliers who can provide the necessary raw materials, components, packaging and materials at a price that can lead to maximum savings for a company. The organisations can exploit the low-cost supply to set a competitive price for their products and thereby achieve competitive advantage over other players in the market. The differentiation advantage is unique characteristics or benefits that an organisation's products or services enhance the value of the product to the customer. So this advantage is competitive against the organisation's competitors and can create something called a USP, a unique selling point. So a business will typically seek value for money within procurement to generate profit. Cost leadership focuses on value for money and value for many. So Porter suggested 4 generic business strategies that could be adopted in order to gain a competitive advantage. The strategies relate to the extent to which the scope of business activities are narrow versus broad and the extent in which business seek to differentiate its products. With cost leadership, the objective is to become the lowest cost producer in the industry. With cost focus, businesses seek to lower the cost advantage in just one of the small number of market segments. In the differentiation focus strategy, your business will aim to differentiate with just one or a small number of target market segments. But with differentiation leadership, the business targets much wider markets and aims to achieve competitive advantage through both differentiation and across the whole industry. But value needs to be created. It's not just created in isolation, so a chain of activities needs to be linked together in an optimal manner to make and deliver things at the best and most efficient way. So the diagram you can see here shows how an organisation can strengthen their core competencies by building on and exploiting their differentiated resources. So this facilitates value creation as organisations works on innovation, expanding the range of products, developing competitive advantage, and generating organisational profits. Now, sources of differential advantage is things like where innovation grows from need. So the higher the need, the higher the stakes are for developing a solution to fulfill that need. And differential advantage starts with identifying the need in the market, and it's then followed by innovation and customer acquisition. A wide range of products and brands is a popular strategy. It saves time and money, makes looking for products or purchase very easy. So, for example, a convenience store offering a wide range of goods will typically have a competitive advantage over a store offering a wide range of goods that typically have a competitive advantage over only offering a very limited range. And brand image leads to the decision to purchase the brand again. So, for example, Apple's brand image links the benefits of its products with the emotional part of the consumer because they feel connected to the brand. But customer care is an integral part of the marketing and expansion tactics for an organisation. Excellent levels of service and listening to your customers enables customers to have a good experience with the brand. But in order to provide an ever better experience, an organisation focus should be on value-added activities that allow it to maintain a good position in the market. Consistent quality and additional value leads to good customer experience, which results in a competitive advantage. Now, the use of fixed pricing, variable pricing, and cost plus arrangements are effective pricing arrangements, which is really important if you're going to have a competitive advantage over your competitors and make a profit. Now, of course, every organisation aims to price its products to recoup its cost. But fixed pricing is the price that's quoted by the seller and it doesn't change. So, in other words, when the seller quotes the price, there is no scope for negotiation. The price stays stable. Fixed pricing is constant and doesn't depend on quantity. So, for example, e-commerce websites show a fixed delivery charge for a specific location on the final bill. The delivery charge is set to the organisation so they can recoup the cost of delivery. Variable pricing is a pricing that's quoted by the seller, which is subject to change. It might depend on quantity of the product as well as other factors. There is scope for negotiation and the price is changeable. Now, variation in pricing is driven by qualitative as well as quantitative factors. So, for example, in logistics, there is a variable cost of altering the route due to there being a price per kilometre. And then cost plus arrangement is where the buyer pays the seller for the total cost plus an additional amount to allow for profits. Supplier adds up the direct and indirect costs to make a total cost incurred by the supplier. And after this, the markup percentage is added to the total cost to derive at the final price. Fixed and static pricing is a strategy in which price points are established and maintained for an extended period of time, whereas dynamic pricing means the price of the product or service can change over time. Fixed prices is intended to attract more customers and compliance and their clients because it offers them assurance. It's consistent so customers can get used to your pricing and you've got less risk of offending them by fluctuating prices over time. But the dynamic pricing offers, I suppose it's often referred to as a discriminatory pricing method because it allows you to maximize profits when the customer really needs it. So it's common for things like events. So initially demand is low, but event managers will sell open tickets to generate what revenue is possible. But the more people want to attend that event, the higher the price is likely to be. And then, they may even sell it at a lower price when they're trying to fill up the last few remaining seats. But another dynamic pricing method allows you to adjust prices for service projects or products based on time and cost involved in fluctuating demand. Like seafood distributors and restaurants, they often vary depending on the season or the time of the day. And the variable pricing system for altering the price or product is based on the current levels of supply and demand. It's commonly applied in those environments where supply and demand is easily available. So if you're selling something through an auction, that will change depending on the amount of demand for it. And that's evidenced by bid prices. Or an example of airline seats, where airlines can adjust the price based on the number of seats that have already been sold. And this variable pricing will allow for following business cycles. So price of the lawnmowers is high in the summer season, since this is when the demand spikes. Once the summer season is over, price declines because there's little demand. And the seller wants to clear their excess inventory. But some companies refuse to use variable pricing because they find that it annoys the customer. So someone who paid a high price for a seat on an aeroplane will be annoyed. And if he finds that the person sitting next to him spent a fraction of what he spent, it will annoy the customer enormously. So it doesn't work in all situations where price is physically fixed. Cost plus involves adding a markup to the costs involved in making the goods or service to arrive at that selling price. But this approach, you add together your direct and indirect labours and material costs for the product, and then you add the markup percentage on top to derive your price. It's quite easy to derive a price product pricing using this method, you could define the overhead allocation method in order to be consistent in calculating price of multiple products. But customers are willing to accept this method for a contractual arrangement with a customer, since it assures that having its costs reimbursed but also making a profit, so there's no risk to the contract. But the use of open book costing and cost transparency is done when open book costing, the supplier shares the information with the buyer about the costs that are actually incurred and delivered the product or service. Now, the supplier is paid these costs plus an agreed profit margin, which does obviously promote better collaboration between a buyer and supplier. And the aim is to reduce cost with the buyer while maintaining or increasing the profit for the supplier. And you can see that in these two views. The one on the left is the price now, and the price in the future does reduce, but the profit and labour cost stays the same. If you're going to do this, you need to go through 4 stages, certainly exploring it first, because not all suppliers are going to be willing to go into open book costing with you. So you need to gauge their willingness and level of interest. Then test it out in a low risk way, and then scale it up so that the activity is tested out in bigger areas to generate bigger benefits, and then embed it in your business as usual. The use of incentive pricing or gain share is a process in which the supplier is motivated to deliver a product either earlier or at lower costs to bring about material benefit to the client and other supply chain partners. Incentives can be built around cost, schedule, quality, performance, and safety. But an important factor in creating an effective management strategy is to ensure the best alignment of the different goals for customers and contractors. So the 3 variations to incentive-based pricing is outcome-based pricing. So that's centered on delivering a particular outcome, like decreasing costs or increasing asset utilization. It's beneficial if the supplier can demonstrate that its work has directly created the anticipated result. So if outcome-based pricing is performed successfully by an IT service provider, then that provider has end-to-end control over the IT infrastructure, which helps the provider to demonstrate how the service produced can affect business results. Revenue-based pricing, in effect, is a subset of the outcome-based pricing model. But the service provider provides payments that are associated with a rise in the buyer's income that's dependent on the supplier's performance. So again, IT services, they might provide a service to a business. Then this service effectively becomes part of your strategy and your business process. And if revenue increases in the same quarter, it can be difficult to apportion the credit between the organisation itself and the supplier. And the last one is gain share, pain share. You can work with suppliers and split the savings or the extra costs. The provider has an incentive to recognise cost reduction processes because the result is mutually beneficial between them and the supplier. And this is part of best practice when you're spurring on new ideas or trying to reduce costs. But the major challenge here is it's difficult to build these added benefits into a contract. So a practical alternative is a yearly proposal by the supplier for deals that could lead to mutual benefits. Now, traditionally, a flow of materials can be considered only at an operational level, but this approach is no longer adequate. It's now essential for businesses to manage the supply chain in order to improve customer service and achieve a balance between cost and service, thereby giving a company a competitive advantage. And managers must work to integrate the supply chain, so it needs to ensure that all functions and activities involved in the supply chain work harmoniously together. And then to develop an integrated supply chain means the supply chain from several perspectives, time, cost, quality, technology, and sustainability, must all be coordinated and harmonised as a whole. Supplier rationalisation or supply-based reduction is a way of reducing supply base by strategically decreasing the number of active suppliers. And the primary objective is to reduce the overall number of suppliers and derive better outcomes and value from these relationships. Strategic sourcing is the process of identifying, assessing, choosing, managing, and developing suppliers to achieve better supply chain performance. The continuous process is driven by a rigorous and collaborative approach that addresses all saving avenues. And its focus is on following things like best products and services in the market, using total cost of ownership, customer needs, your goals, and also the market conditions. There are 4 steps to supplier rationalisation. Step 1 is the prep stage, establishing cross-functional teams for consistency in your purchasing, sourcing and procurement activities, which does include spend analysis. The scope of the supply-based reduction is then defined based on this analysis. And there are 2 methods: supplier elimination, reducing the number of suppliers based on their performance and capabilities, or product standardization, replacing several products with a single product with similar functions. The next step is the framework development. And you're outlining growth by identifying supplier elimination criteria. The elimination criteria work on a number of products purchased from each supplier. Assortment criteria build upon supplier performance with the quantity, quality, location, delivery, labour costs and financial stability. And the decision about which supplier to eliminate is based on the in-depth analysis of data collected over time. And then the product and data analysis, looking at suppliers who exceed the primary assortment criteria, along with suppliers who offer more detailed products and services. A risk assessment is then performed to analyse each supplier's ability to generate profit and value for your organisation. And then the final stage is assessment level. You're consolidating the suppliers for each category. So strategic suppliers in major and important spend areas like CapEx and research and development, and other suppliers in key categories like packaging, marketing and logistics. Then you've got your important tactical suppliers in your indirect categories, like fleet, HR, legal, finance. And finally, operational suppliers in transactional areas like office supplies and amenities. A supply-based reduction takes on average between 22 and 24 weeks. Now, strategic sourcing follows 5 sourcing procedures which aids in supplier rationalisation. So the first is to do your spend analysis, develop your sourcing strategy. That could be sole provider, multi-provider, local, international, global. And then identify the potential suppliers from your strategy. Identify and assess your suppliers, and then manage the relationships. So one of your supply strategies or sourcing strategies might be to go down single sourcing or sole sourcing. So this takes place when you buy from one supplier, either because they are the only supplier or because you choose for that to be the only supplier. So a sole source is not a choice, whereas single source is your choice. It's been carefully chosen. So decisions are usually made at strategic and top level management, where you need to determine whether or not the value from a single relationship is better than one from multiple relationships. It's often opted for when the purpose of reducing material costs is replacing all purchasing requirements with one supplier. You can get better purchasing conditions, but there are some prerequisites for single sourcing, including prior commitments, successful past relationship, or an ongoing long-term relationship with the supplier. But in addition, it can be justified when the supplier can offer unique or outstanding quality, or the order is so small it's not worth dividing it up, and concentrating purchasing to lead to price or cost reduction, or the use of just-in-time is much easier with a single supplier. But the downside of this strategy is the increased dependence of the buyer on the supplier. It's very difficult to balance the pros and cons. Being dependent on a supplier can impose a number of risks: constant price increases, lowering quality or delivery, slowed down or continuous improvement programs. Now, supply problems at Ford resulted in the temporary 3-day shutdown of the Fiesta and Puma manufacturing facility in Cologne, Dagenham and Germany. The source of the supply problem was a computer glitch at Ford, their provider of the door and trunk latches. Those 3 days lost at Ford cost approximately 70 million in labour costs and the production of around 7,000 vehicles. Whilst not a recent situation, a discussion on the reliance Peugeot has on its parts suppliers is relevant when considering the risks of single sourcing. Their provider produces 11% of their parts. Additionally, the manufacturing of seats is entirely dependent on another supplier. Should a shutdown occur, the company would be left with no seats for its vehicles. So detailed analysis of costs and benefits are necessary in strategic sourcing decisions because of the risks associated. Uncertainty of supply, overdependence, inflexible of volumes, limited capacity and lost opportunities. But there are some benefits. The benefits is lower pricing due to consolidation of requirements, more consistent quality, repeatable quality, lower purchasing workload due to communication with fewer suppliers, which makes it easier to manage their performance because you're tracking fewer suppliers and you can track down the source of the problems, work together to investigate. And then price negotiation. Now, if price negotiations are going to be successful, there must be a zone within which party is able to come to a possible agreement. This is known as the ZOPA, the zone of possible agreement. Outside this zone, the parties may walk away. This walkaway position represents a resistant point in the zone of potential agreement. In many instances, this zone will relate to price, but it can be other things like time, quality, or quantity. They will also set a range of targets that they can build upon to get a better deal. So you'll set something like a must, intend, and like, MIL, the price they must achieve to make it agreement, the price they intend to achieve, which will be lower than the top price, and finally, the one that they would like to achieve. So, for example, the negotiator would establish the highest price of a product for the market is £100. Then they decide how much they want to achieve, and they would like to achieve at least a reduction of 20. So they then decide if they achieve the price, they can try to achieve another. If they can achieve this, they'll push for further, and the price will ultimately be like this. The must, intend, would like would be I must get 80, I intend to get 60, but I'd like 40. Now, the negotiation map is constructed by identifying our current position and plotting a course towards the final destination. So it's important that the negotiator understands the market in which they're negotiating, as well as gathering all the data they'll need to gain the experience of the market over a period of time. And they create a network of contacts and a knowledge base that will provide information. The data will include things like prices, costs, and quantities and qualities, as well as other variables in the negotiation. Now, when you're negotiating, markers are set on the map to determine where you will go in a negotiation and where you might exit if it doesn't go according to plan. So they might include your initial price or level of quality. If you don't have markers, you're missing a big mistake, or you're making a big mistake, sorry. And the reason that is because when you're not setting markers due to time, you might commit to a negotiation if you're not aware of when to exit. You may not be knowing when to exit. You may place yourself in a position to accept less from a negotiation than you otherwise could obtain. Now, CrowdJet introduced a competitive portfolio approach for use in purchasing and supply management. The general idea of CrowdJet approach is to minimize supply risk and make the most of your buying power. So it includes the construction of 2 portfolio matrices classified for purchasing products and services on 2 dimensions, profit and risk. Low value items can be bought on a competitive basis. High value, high risks can be purchased in a more collaborative way. So competitive supply is the approach used when parties are trying to attempt to divide something up. so as to say distributing what's available between the parties. A competitive relationship, the party will simply look at what's available and try to get a greater share of the pie. Now, common tactics include presenting a very high price, which is something called highball, and then they use ploys to achieve the outcomes. Threats and ultimatums may also be used, but each party attempts to recover what the other party has gained as much as possible. In spite of the other party, rarely does it lead to a 50-50 split. Now, collaboration in a supply strategy is where each party collaborates to find a win-win. And it focuses on developing mutual benefit arrangements in which the interests of both parties are important to one another. So it refers to the potential of parties' interests to be combined in a way that increases value and therefore expands the pie. Potential integration only exists when there is mutual issues involved in the agreement. This is because parties must be able to make trade-offs between the variables and satisfy the outcomes. So here again, you can see the Kraujek model. Every supply decision is backed up by this model. It helps you to maximize supply security and reduce cost by making the most of your purchasing power. And it helps you to identify the nature of your relationship. Where there are many suppliers offering the same product, the supply risk is very low. The classification of the supply model therefore depends on annual spend of the buyer of that particular product. The buyer needs to analyse how the annual spend of that particular product affects the profits of the company. And as the number of capable suppliers reduces, the risk faced by the buyer increases. So you must also look at your spend on a particular material through spend analysis. Value analysis and value engineering. It's the ratio between function and cost. But value engineering takes place at the design stage of the product lifecycle, aiming to enhance functionality and reduce cost. And procurement's focus is on finding the best value for money at this stage. Value engineering was developed towards the end of World War II by the General Electric Company when a shortage of materials and labour affected their production. The term value engineering was used as the company was involved in designing and building marine power plants for the preposition of Navy ships. This allowed General Electric to engineer the cost saving into the design. But it's a systematic and organised approach to providing necessary functions in a project at the lowest possible cost, promotes the substitution of materials and methods with less expensive alternatives without sacrificing functionality. Its sole focus on the components and materials rather than the physical attributes. Value analysis, though, it has the same principles, it's the same relationship, but it actually is to existing products that are probably somewhere in maturity on their life cycle. So it looks to remove costs from a product that's already been established. So the value analysis is one of the newer scientific aids to managerial decision making because it looks at techniques that are aimed at systematically identifying unnecessary costs and eliminating them without impairing its quality or effectiveness. And then in operational supplier relationships, the interaction between a company and its suppliers can be described as driven by operational need of the different functions. And as a result, relationships are considered arm's length and contractually orientated rather than mutually beneficial ventures. The buying organisation needs to identify a need, approach the market and select the supplier. The strategic relationship is a mutual ongoing relationship between a buyer and a supplier, involving a commitment over an extended period of time and entailing a sharing of information, as well as sharing the risks and rewards of that relationship. So the buying organisation identifies an area of alignment between themselves and the market, develops a strategy to build partnerships, collaboratively exploring solutions and options, and form a partnership agreement. Now, strategic versus operational suppliers, they do range from one extreme to the other, which has a range where there are additional relationship types. So operational suppliers focus on the ultimate fulfillment of needs, and the relationship between parties is strictly transactional. Buyers may have an arm's-length relationship. Strategic suppliers involve a closer network of suppliers, utilising their efforts and increasing the performance of all parties involved. And that's by consistently learning, developing and flourishing together. They may include vertical or horizontal collaboration. So vertical collaboration is where two or more organisations from different supply chain tiers share information, resources and responsibilities and best practice to serve the end customer. So, for example, Starbucks started collaborating directly with its suppliers to enhance supplier performance, which allowed it to provide the best experience to its customers. Horizontal collaboration is where two or more autonomous organisations at the same time and level work together to implement supply chain operations to create mutual benefits. So, for example, Hershey and Ferrero decided to share a warehouse, their transport, logistics and distribution to achieve cost savings and sharing in the flexibility of production. These collaborative relationships result in lower inventory levels, higher inventory turns and better customer service. The partnership model developed by Lambert comprised of 4 steps, examining the drivers of participation for partnership, the facilitation of the partnership, and the collaboration of components and the measurements of the outcomes. Now, drivers are the compelling reasons to partner and must be examined first when approaching a period or a potential partner. The facilitators are characterised with 2 firms that will help or hinder the partnership process. So it's a combination of facilitators and drivers that prescribe the appropriate type of partnership. Components are the managerially controlled elements that can be implemented at various levels depending on the amount of partnership present. How they're actually implemented will determine which ultimate type of partnership exists. Outcomes are the extent to which each firm has achieved its expected performance. Now, the partnership sourcing is a key element of risk mitigation. They also help understand suppliers and establish collaborative links with them that can help to define a clear picture of the local market. The networks and uncover the opportunities that may or may not have been considered in the first place, which include synergies, efficiencies, and other areas of competitive advantage. Now, partnership sourcing can lead to long-term collaboration. That's based on trust between a buyer and a supplier. But it represents a collaborative approach in which a buying organisation and a smaller number of its suppliers work closely in order to share information, risks and rewards for a competitive, cooperative relationship focusing on continuous improvement. Once the partners are locked into a partnership, it can be difficult. And it can be costly to get out. If the partnership breaks down, there's repercussions regarding security of supply. There is a possibility of leaked confidential data, including designs and patents. There will be costs involved to manage and reduce and resource the relationship. But the partners are restricted to their ability to trade with other parties. Each party could become complacent, and the components and benefits of the partnership will dry up. If the partners become overdependent, they will be leaving themselves vulnerable to forces in the marketplace. So the disadvantage of partnerships would include the fact that each owner or member is exposed to unlimited liability for their activities. Transferability can be difficult to achieve, and if a partner is unstable, it can be automatically dissolved when one partner no longer wants to participate in the business or can no longer do so. And lack of trust from a supplier is often displayed through lack of motivation or where suppliers refuse to take on new tasks. And there is little supplier input at meetings or briefings. Unpleasant behaviour from suppliers starts to make, I suppose, derogatory marks towards the buying organisation, and there are few events attended by representatives of the supplier. Failing productivity, the lack of motivation is reflected in the reduction in output. Increased excuses, the supplier is unwilling to admit to or talk about problems and make excuses. And finally, an increased level of grievance from suppliers regarding their treatment by the buying organisation. Now, trust is a powerful accelerator to produce performance, and when trust goes up, speed also goes up and cost comes down, producing a trust dividend, if you like. How do you know if you have high trust culture, though? By observing behaviour of your people. In high trust institutions, we observe the behaviours listed within here. So you can see things like information being shared or mistakes are tolerated, culture of innovation, people are loyal, people talk straight and confront real issues, there is a real communication, collaboration, we share credit abundantly and openly, few meetings after meetings, transparency is a practiced value, people are candid and authentic, high degree of accountability, and a palatable energy where people feel positive momentum. Now, another very visible indicator is the behaviour of your customers and suppliers. I mean, what's your customer churn rate? Do you have a history of long-term customers and supplier relationships? What's your reputation or brand equity in the marketplace? Without trust, people turn away. Now, trust is centrally ongoing to organise in theory in the buyer and supplier relationship. It builds slowly from experience as the relationship progresses and vanishes as the firms seek to leave the relationship. Firms in buyer-supplier relationships are more willing to work with others in the firm that they can trust. When trust prevails, employees involved in supplier development activities will be more open to knowledge sharing with employees of other parties. Therefore, the outcome of the supplier development activities is trust-based and relationship-based, which is much more positive. And one of the most critical factors in a committed and collaborative relationship between the supply chain partners is definitely trust. If trust is present, it can improve the chances of successful supply chain relationship. If not, transaction costs can rise through poor performance. Now, the mainstream view holds that over time, buyers and supplier relationships evolve through a number of phases. As a consequence, supply development as a buyer through supplier relationship management practice should be adapted to a life cycle phase. Now, supply development activities matching the buyer-supplier relationship cycle phase will lead to more favourable performance improvements. For the relationship to grow into a more strategic relationship, there needs to be a higher degree of communication, transparency, and trust. And that's the end of Learning Outcome 3. Thank you for watching.